Right, I'd like to welcome David Cherylambus. David, we've had a few conversations over the last few months and really, really interesting stuff. Really interesting stuff. Can you tell our audience kind of who you are, what you're up to,
Yeah.
what your experience is?
So early on in the pandemic, like many people, alarm bells were going off in my mind. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? I'd had 25 years of studying psychology, perception, behavioral science, NLP, these various things to really understand how we make sense of the world. I considered myself very good with debating people, and then all of a sudden, the ways that I would debate well stopped working. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? So the conditioning of people's minds had been ramped up, the volume had been turned up significantly. And then I spent really much the last 4 years deep in the research to understand what had happened and how really what we talk about is dialogue. How can you create a dialogue where people can exchange ideas rather than just throw ideas at everyone?
Mhm.
And you'll see that happen so often. Most conversations on social media are not dialogue, it's just people trying to prove their points and invariably not succeeding. Yeah. And I think I've seen a lot of people now turn around and say, oh, I'm giving up waking anyone up. And
Yeah.
there's so many problems with that sentence anyway, but that's the conclusion that people have come to. People don't listen, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a valid conclusion to come to. But if we think about this in a clear, scientific, logical way, is it true? Okay. So if people are becoming aware, okay, so something's working because a lot of people now know
Mm.
that something's wrong with a lot of the policies and the way that society functions. But people don't understand the details of what's going on. And I think when you understand that a lot more, then you can understand how to communicate with people. We can understand, how society functions, what are the rules, what are the procedures, who's doing the pushing the propaganda, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's what we done. We created reachingpeople.net, and I consult to a lot of scientific academic groups, really how they can get their message across to the public.
Mm. Fantastic. Lance, I know you're going to ask the first question. Um, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously where we've so peacekeepers and specifically, we take an evidence-based route with respect to what we're claiming and equally with the claims that people make. Now this is throwing up some interesting conflict in so much as we want to establish a foundation upon which we can engage because at the end of the day, if we're about truth, truth doesn't care for the challenge, it doesn't mind it.
Yeah.
Um, but what we are finding is that we're finding ourselves increasingly in conflict because we're simply trying to progress in a rational and evidence-based fashion. It's really trying to kind of understand what's
Yeah.
going on there and how we can develop those conversations rather than leading to fractious shutdowns, you're arrogant, blah blah blah, whatever.
Yeah, well, the thing to really, I mean, there's so much here, and we spoke earlier, obviously, and there's so many different things to understand about how the mind works that will start to give you really some understanding about what's going on here. If you look through all of the various movement that's going on now, one of the pretty much present in all of them is conflict. Okay. Now, one of the first things that we and a lot of the time we'll talk about what our brains do, and what I mean by that is that a lot of my behavior is automatic. A lot of the thoughts that come into my head are automatic. They won't all be true, they won't all be correct, and I've got to have discernment over myself to understand that. Now, since the dawn of time, when you get two people talking, the default that people go into is that they're right and the other person's wrong. Okay, that's a default. There's not necessarily, people can override this. A lot of scientists do. Now, David Bohm wrote a book called On Dialogue, and he was pointing out that science suffers from this more than anything. Okay, so if you think about Semmelweis, does everyone know about this gentleman? So he basically, a couple of 100 years ago, in his hospital, they had the lowest mortality rate of children. Okay. And they had introduced a way to sterilize their hands before they gave birth. Okay. He went to the established doctor's profession of his country, explained what he was doing. They put him in a mental institute. Okay. Now you'll see this through history time and time and time again. If whatever you're doing or saying challenges the established ideas, and if it's a big mob, like a government or a medical community or whatever it is, it's very difficult for people to disidentify it with their ideas. Okay. So it's more what you're saying means to them that's more important than actually what you're saying. Okay. So if what you're saying would turn out to be true, and then it means that whatever they're doing is false, that's then going to be a subconscious attack on them, and they're going to feel the need to attack you. Okay. And that's going to be a drive that's going to be present in all of us. And it's really something we have to overcome. Okay. As I joked earlier, you know, I was talking to one of the guys in the media and explaining this problem where we just adopt a position where we think we're right, is that when this gentleman was riding a cycle, the car drivers were annoying twats. When he was in the car, the cyclists were annoying twats. And he could see that he was in both positions, and whichever position he was in, the other was wrong. It's really easy to adopt that position. And I've experienced it many times myself. Something else. So that's one of the problems, is that, you know, people identify with what they believe. And when they do, if what they believe is being attacked, they feel the need to defend. Okay. It's really important not to identify. And obviously, the way you phrased the question was the way to phrase it, which was, there's this thing called fact, evidence, and truth. And that's going to be my compass, not what I believe.
Yeah.
So it's external to your belief systems. Okay. And the way that, you can shut most of the trolls up is you say to them, if what you were doing turned out, hypothetically, to cause more harm than good, would you still do it? Okay. So you've put the process against the belief system. And then you can also say to them, if it was a choice between finding the truth and being right, but you couldn't do both, what would you choose? See what you've done now? You've challenged that the ultimate challenge is, now this is the thing, once we commit to the truth, obviously it's a very subjective thing, but there is areas where, there is a lot of objectivity to it. But once you commit to that, what you believe and your thoughts are secondary to the objective measure. Make sense? And that's effectively when you can create the environment where that is the goal and the person doesn't feel attacked. There's no need to defend. It's like we're in this together on the same side. You're going to see a lot of those reactions toned down. But there's something else that's important to understand as well. And I spoke about it. It's a concept that sounds complex, but it's not really, but it's really important to understand. And it's called the illusion of explanatory depth. This is why when you're talking to a lot of people that adopt a woke sort of perspective, is when you start to question them about their beliefs, they get very annoyed. Now, the reason is because they don't have a lot of substance to what they believe. They've just been told it or given the conclusion or whatever, and then it sounds good, but also they get a lot of social credit by adopting that position. So a lot of companies now are really going overly woke because they think it will make them look like better companies and they sell more product. You could argue whether they gave a shit in any way. But the thing is, when someone doesn't have substance to their belief or conclusion, when you start to challenge that substance or conclusion, you're going to see cognitive dissonance, and most people's response to that is anger. Okay. Now, we experience this on the project that I'm on, reachingpeople.net, where we created another website and we were looking to take very complex subjects on COVID, and we were writing, 1 or 2 page summaries so the public could really start to think clearly about something. So we wrote one on Mars, we wrote one on this, that. When we went to write them, some of them we had the required information to write, but then we realized some of them we didn't actually know as much as we thought we knew. So that's where we were experiencing that IOED, the illusion of explanatory depth. And it's only when you try to explain it to someone else, a lot of the time you start to see the gaps in your own knowledge. Now, there's a very powerful study around this where they went to Labour supporters and Conservative supporters, and they said to them, why do you support your party? Okay. Now, that why question is one to really avoid in that specific context. Don't ask someone why they believe what they believe, because all you get is the rationalization and the justification for why they do. So, and what happens is that they believe it even more. So they said to the Labour Conservative, and then they gave them loads of rationalization. They said, can we make a donation on your behalf? They said, sure, that'd be great. They changed the question. They said, can you, in the second lot, they said, can you explain the policies of the party you support? And then what happened was the people suddenly realized that they couldn't, because they didn't know. I mean, I would beg them to ask that most Labour and Conservative or whatever party supporters don't really know many of the policies of their party. They might know a few broad strokes, but they wouldn't. Now, when these people suddenly realize, actually, I don't know, and then they said, can we make a donation on your behalf? The people said, actually, no, I need to look into this now. So you see what's happened is the illusion of explanatory depth has been highlighted. Now, there's another important thing to point out is hidden drives. Okay. The guy that's buying the Ferrari, is he buying it because he loves the torque of the engine?
Maybe not.
Or is he buying it because he wants to pull some girls, or he wants to look flash to his friends or whatever? Okay. But if you ask him why he bought that, unless he was a good friend, he's going to give you some bullshit answers. And he might even bullshit himself with those answers.
Yeah.
The truth is, and there's a very famous quote around this, there's always 2 reasons to do something, good reason and the real reason. Okay. Now, the real reason is really important, but it's hidden from a lot of the people when they're doing something. And you can find the real reason by testing it. And as I point out, one of the examples, there's a brilliant book called The Elephant in the Brain. Now, there are 2 actually ethical behavioral scientists who are really trying to bring honesty to a lot of the institutions. And in the book, they point out time and time and time again where there's the hidden drives are driving more than the visible drives. Okay. And even the author found himself having hidden drives that he became aware of by testing or by observation. And one of the authors said, he's asked why he wrote the book. He said, I want to get this information out into the world. And then what happened was that someone quoted the book but didn't acknowledge him, and then he got angry. And he said, so I have to be honest with myself and say that's not the only reason. I also want to be acknowledged for my work. So what you have is you have hidden drives and visible drives. And if the hidden drive is hidden from the person and your question starts to elicit that hidden drive and it's not socially acceptable or socially, if it's frowned upon, say, then the person's going to probably defend themselves. Okay. So a lot of people, if they're doing podcasts, it's going to be important to be popular rather than follow the absolute truth like a dog with a bone. That makes sense? Because a lot of the people that have an unwavering search from the truth tend to piss people off very quickly. Okay.
Really?
Yeah. So you've got to learn to dance. Yeah. So really, we are, I think the scientists over the last 3 or 4 years, and I think hopefully a lot of them now, and even Pierre Corey had, posted a study recently that facts do not change people's minds. This is known very conclusively. We know it now. Now, that's not to say that facts aren't important. They're really important. But those alone won't change. You've got loads of other things that have got to be present. Jerome Bruner showed in the 70s that if you just tell someone a raw fact or put the fact in a story, the story will be 30 times more effective, because the brain's really not good at taking in raw facts. Now, if I said something to you, Brian, that was the opposite of what you believe to be true, there's a good chance that you'll just reject what I'm saying. Okay.
Yeah.
If it was in my sphere of expertise, maybe you would have more, and vice versa. If it was your sphere of expertise, I may dismiss my own, but that's, I'm overriding. But if you don't have a good relationship with someone, the chances are they're just going to reject what you're saying because it doesn't fit in with their world. If what you're saying causes them more problems, say it affects their income or it affects what they're doing, there's going to be a strong drive to dismiss or argue with you. And if they feel attacked, then they're going to want to attack you back. And this is some of the problems going on. So if you look at how many people have flipped their positions, and there has been a lot, it's not been easy for those people to flip their positions, has it?
Right.
Okay. A lot of people, it's really important to allow people to save face. Yeah, to have their ego intact, to not feel attacked, to all of these things. There's a real art to creating a space where people can explore their own viewpoints, opinions, and beliefs, and then change them. Okay, there's a real art to doing that, and it's very challenging, but it can be learned. But if you, hopefully, you start to get a picture now that it's really, you can infer by something that someone will feel attacked. Yeah. And I mean, history starts to reveal itself that anyone that's challenging the established ideas is generally attacked, okay, and vilified and whatever. And then eventually it gets accepted. I mean, with Semmelweis, it was 100 years later, I think somebody else, or 50 years, someone else proposed it, and then it was widely accepted. Be very interested to see if it was just the sheer amount of data, or did the second guy explain it in a different way. It's context is king. Context is so important. So what I mean by context, when you're talking to a person, the context of the conversation is going to be completely different for them, for you, if all their belief systems are different. Make sense? But if you elicit and literally explain ahead of time and set the boundaries, you effectively start to manage the context. So if you say to someone, okay, can we commit that, either of us could be wrong? Now we also have to be, and I think you said it earlier, Lance, the truth will defend itself. Yeah, so you don't need to defend yourself. And if you feel yourself needing to defend yourself, you need to ask yourself, do I really believe, or am I really on the right path? Because when you're on the right path, a lot of things you don't feel the need to defend. Makes sense? That's a lot of the case. It's, the evidence will just defend itself. If you can get someone to in that mindset, that the goal really is, it's like we're heading to this place called truth. The goal is not to win the argument. If you get into the dynamic of the goal is to win the argument, you can't win the argument because they're never going to concede.
Equally, we could both be wrong.
Exactly. And in fact, it's a lot more nuanced than that. That we think it's black and white, but there's usually, I mean, this is the thing Robert Dilts talks about, deep truth and shallow truth. In shallow truth, the opposite of true is false, and vice versa. But in deep truth, the opposite of true is true and false. So at the deeper levels, there's some things that are right, some things that are wrong, and all these things. So if you say to someone, that person's good, well, probably sometimes they're good, but they won't always be good. So at the deeper levels, it's true and false. Yeah. But if you can create a dialogue where your sense of self and everything else isn't dependent on that, then you're going to have much better chance of, it's almost like we both need to be on the same side of the table, finding what the answer is. And if you can create that dynamic and they don't feel attacked, and it doesn't matter what they believe. But this is a lot of the problem of the world today, is people identify with their thoughts. Okay, so if their thought is wrong, they're wrong. That makes sense. But if it doesn't matter, if their thoughts are just things that are arising and things that they've been exposed to, and their sense of self is not in any way impacted about that, then they're much easier to say, actually, I was wrong about that. Yeah. Or I
Well,
was thinking wrong. Yeah.
ironically, you should regard these things as pieces of clothing.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And as I pointed out earlier, I now try and hold opinions and be skeptical about them rather than holding any strong beliefs. Because throughout the course of my life, I've seen so many of my beliefs change. Yeah. And I wrote down some of the mind traps. And one of the traps is wrong is in the past.
Yeah.
And science suffers from this, where you can point out 100 times that they got things wrong. Oh no, we worked it out now and we got it right now. How do you know? Yeah, it's always evolving. You look at the models from Newton to Einstein, all the things, they say, oh, well, that previous model was wrong. And the bridges didn't disappear. It's just that we have different ways of looking at things and they become more accurate. I think one of the other biggest problems is certainty. Is why I say skeptical of your own opinions, because certainty is an emotional response. And truth doesn't care about emotion. In fact, emotion clouds our judgment. So when someone says to me they're 100% certain about a scientific theory, I'm like, well, can you really trust that person? How can you be? Obviously there's some things where you can have so much observational data. And I think it was even, who's the guy that owns Amazon? Not a particularly nice guy, but very wealthy. He said, who was it?
Bezos.
Yes. So he said, if you've got a conflict between data and anecdotal evidence, the data's wrong. Okay. And that's him. Like, so what's going on is all this big data, and you get these scientists quoting all the numbers about this and that. Okay. But you can't dismiss what's going on in reality. Okay. And if there's lots of that going on, that's right and the other thing's wrong. Because what you affect, and this, Feynman's pointed this out, he said, I don't care how wonderful your theory is or elegant or whatever, if it doesn't match reality, it's wrong. Yeah. So you talk to a scientist about certain procedures that they bought in, medical procedures, they give you all these hundreds of pages and all this elaborate thing. Well, it doesn't matter if it didn't work. If it doesn't stop this and it doesn't stop that and it's causing more problems than it solves, it's wrong. I don't care what your theory is wrong. And this is the thing, that it's very hard. I mean, if you want to piss someone off, just say they're wrong. It's literally the quickest way to piss them off and trigger the defense. But the biggest tip is you've got to avoid triggering defense in someone. Okay. Now that really is an art form that you guys will have to learn if it's, if the truth really is going to trigger defense. You've got to find a way around that. But that's certainly some food for thought around those things.
The other problem is, I think that if you do present some evidence, then people find it really, really difficult, in my opinion, to understand the logic and the reason in that evidence. Where it's blatantly obvious to me or Mark or Lance.
Yeah.
Some people will go, well, no, we read it like this.
Yeah.
And we go, what? But it's really, really obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing about context.
Right.
Now, context is king. Now, what you miss is, there's so many things around this that are really important to understand. We think, and I think this comes largely from our indoctrination at school, is that facts exist in a vortex. Okay, so we think like you place this fact here. What we don't realize is it has to sit on hundreds of legs. Okay, if the person you're talking to has different legs, I'll give you an example. They showed that they took a headline, yeah, and they put it into 4 different magazines. Depending on which magazine it was in, its believability changed significantly. Okay, but the magazine was the context, but the person's not thinking about the context. So context is automatic and unconscious. It literally processes in a moment. So when you present say you've got Joe and Jane, so we've got Jane and Joe. Jane doesn't believe anything about the official narrative around COVID as an example. And Joe, maths professor, trusts the science, following the science, etc. Now, if Joe gives Jane an article from the BBC, what's Jane going to do? Exactly what you do. She's going to laugh.
Yeah,
That's propaganda nonsense.
yeah.
Then Jane presents an article from an independent website. What's Joe going to do?
Same thing.
Exactly. You see what's gone on? The same thing is being construed differently and interpreted differently. But because we can't see in their mind and they can't see in ours, we're under the illusion that we're talking about the same thing. So this is why you've got to manage context. And in certain things, you've almost got to, it's almost like you're setting the terms and conditions of the conversation. But we almost never do that. And we almost infer it and then we assume. And then what you get people saying, oh, that person's stupid. Now let's test that. Is that person stupid? And it turns out a lot of the time, it's actually the more intelligent ones that are believing the indoctrination stuff. Because as David McCraney in his book, How Minds Change, which is a brilliant book, he says, the more educated, the more intellectual, the more, educational pieces of paper you have, the more you're going to rationalize and find excuses for what you believe. So you're just going to be much more skillful at justifying what you believe. And that's what you see time and time again. Okay. Because invariably it's the people that just don't have all of that noise or that fog, that they can literally look at something. And you see this with farmers and these people that are just naturally intelligent, and they go, well, that's bullshit, because they don't have all the smoke and mirrors. That makes sense. And that's why, intelligence are very hard thing to quantify, but that's why logic will fail people a lot, because over the last 3 years, they give people all these linear logical arguments and people just went along and believed them. But, the reality did not match that. So really on that point, it's really to understand context, and you can elicit context. And then when you understand that, if you imagine that they've got a belief, the belief sits on a table that's got like 20 legs. If you start to really investigate those legs and get those legs sort of undermined naturally, the person will change their mindset. And I had an interesting message from a friend of mine who I hadn't spoke to for a while, because we kind of defriended over COVID, as it were. And he's a member of Mensa, very intelligent guy. And I put on my Facebook about, do we trust the studies from one of the pharmaceuticals? And he put 100%. And I'm like, wow. Anyway, I had a few conversations. I explained a few stories with him. Anyway, I got a message a couple of weeks ago where he messaged me. He said, I owe you an apology. I've done a complete U-turn. I've looked into this and this and this, and I can see we were lied to completely. He was literally the last person I thought would spin, but he did. Now, if you think about his legs of belief, once they change, the belief collapses. The problem is we try to tell people the belief isn't true, but we don't realize the belief has come from so many other things. So why would someone trust that something would be safe and effective, right? And then you think, right, well, they must trust the media. They must trust this. They must trust that. So if we took the media as an example, okay, and then I told him a story about Boeing. So he'd say, well, if that was true, it'd be in the media. I said, well, in fact, there's a story about Boeing that Cheryl Atkinson has in her book, where she says, the safety department at Boeing, there was a couple of whistleblowers that came to her and they said, look, they're cutting corners. They're not doing the full process. They look into it. It's horrendous. They put this big story together. It's due to go out on the Monday. Boeing phone up CBS, where she worked over the weekend, and they got the story pulled. Okay. What would normally happen is that story would happen. There would then be congressional hearings. There'd be a slap on the wrist. They'd change the processes. None of that happened. And then 2 planes fell out of the sky the next couple of years as a result of the safety protocols, from what I can remember from the story in the book. So now when you tell enough of those stories, is it true that if it was true, it'd be in the media? Well, no. If it disagrees with profit, it's almost definitely not going to be in the media. So if the person gets exposed to enough of those stories, the unconscious mind changes its belief system, and then the output is different. The challenge that most people face is that they try and change the output, but it's too late. That's the conclusion. You need to change the input. And there's an old saying in computers, isn't there? Shit in, shit out.
Yeah.
And that's why the media is so powerful. And and most of us don't really challenge our own belief systems. But that's a very wise thing to do.
So,
Because yeah.
sorry. I think I've learned to challenge my own belief systems for many years.
Yeah.
And I believe that I need to continually do that to make progress.
Yes.
So, how would you advise, or what would you say to someone to, because it's a learning curve and it's a discipline, I believe, to be able to do that anyway.
Oh, absolutely. Once you've done that, but you see, the thing is, when you're talking to someone, you'll unconsciously assume that they're probably doing the same thing.
Yeah.
See, we naturally project our perspectives into the conversation. We have to, okay? But the challenge comes when the perspectives are different. If they're projecting differently, that's where the conflict comes, because your conflict is different ideas. The skill is to create a situation where they don't feel threatened, you don't feel threatened, and it's not about what you believe. It's about adopting and finding the truth. So it's like that third party thing. That's where that book by David Bohm on dialogue is really, really important, because he points out that most of science is failing in that output. You know, when they debate, it's not about. So I would joke with people when I talk about this. Have you ever seen a political debate on TV where one person turns around and goes, the other guy's right? Never happens, because the dynamic is not the dynamic of a scientific dialogue or a logical dialogue or whatever you want, you know, where you create a space where, right, we're going to find the truth. The space is, I've got to win and I've got to get the other guy to look stupid. Okay. Because if we're going to be honest, what is a politician's goal? Most of them, not all.
Re-elected.
Exactly. So if the way to get re-elected, but yet what would they tell you is their goal?
Your best interest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you've got a conflict of drives. Yeah. And they might even bullshit themselves. But whatever the highest drive is, will drive the behavior of that person. Okay. And that's the thing that really importantly to understand. Now, if their drive is to win the argument, then you can't get anywhere with them. But if you can show them that there's a better goal to have, and they then adopt that goal, or you both agree on a different goal is the better way of looking at it, then you have different behaviors. See how it works? Because if you get into the dynamic of what we talk about as the lawyer dynamic, which is the lawyer doesn't care what the truth is, he's just trying to win the case. Yeah, and that's obviously, you know, I'm sure there are a lot of them do care what the truth is, but the setting, the setting breeds the situation where that makes sense. So priming, actually, there's this thing called priming, which is, you know, whatever situation we're primed into. So if you prime someone into the lawyer debate, basically it's not going to go well because you've created this dynamic. If you prime them into the scientific dialogue, very well, you both prime each other into that situation. They had these Swiss bankers as a study, right? And what they did was they said, we want you to flip this coin. For every heads, we're going to give you $10, but you can do it in a closed room and just report it. Okay. When they reported it, they were pretty honest. But when they primed them by asking them about being bankers before they did the study, they then cheated. Okay. And there's something about when a banker's being a banker, it's like dog eat dog, you know, greed is good, all those things. So the drives change. See what goes on? So we can actually move from one drive to the other. And in fact, The Elephant in the Brain is a fantastic book to understand these drives. But if the drive is to win the argument, then you can see how that's going to be the worst dynamic to be in. Yeah. And people fall into this all the time. Yeah. You see it on social media that someone will make a statement, claim to be true, no evidence, someone would attack it. And then they go, oh, you're not being open-minded. And then it's just a game of one-upmanship. Yeah. How can I make the other person look stupid? Does that make sense? You can see how you end up down that path.
I've got another question, and this has infuriated me for many years, right? I call it the interview circuit. So the new guru of today will come on, be introduced, and will then flick the switch, and then off he goes, or she goes, or whoever it is. And the interviewer will not ask what I would regard as the right questions.
Yeah.
They are allowed to present their belief, which is now a common belief, more common than when it was 14 years ago when I started hearing it. And by the end of it, it's assumed that it's gospel truth. Then the audience are now listening to this, and there are more of these particular people saying the same things. I call them repeaters. And now the audience start repeating it. And when they try and present it to us in our Telegram group, we've got a set of rules, David, right?
Yeah.
We're very strict on the rules, and they're very, very simple. It's a membership of a community, right? Like any other community. So we've got these rules, and we're presented, and we go strike one, strike two, strike three. Sorry, but we can't entertain you any longer. So it's the repeating thing. So how do we? I mean, I believe I can identify the people that aren't really after the truth by the questions that they don't ask.
Yeah. Well, there's the thing there's the wider problem that we face is that we live in a society that really values a lot of shallowness, and our indoctrination and belief systems, all of these things. If you talk to a person that's adopting the woke views and you ask them a question about what they believe, they generally get angry. And that comes back to that illusion of explanatory depth. They've been given the conclusion, and they're then under this illusion, and we all suffer from it from any number of different things, because it's what the brain does. It gives you this false sense of security, because it's evolutionary, positive to do so. That makes sense, because you fit in with a group and you look like one of the better persons, gives you confidence, all these things. So they then realize they don't know what they're talking about and they get angry, but they get a certain amount of kudos from having that belief. So, how many people are putting up, I mean, look at that NPC meme where it says, I support the current thing. Okay. They're supporting it because they want the likes, they want social acceptance and all of this. And that's just a result of the impoverished belief systems that we inherit from our parents and our schooling. We're not given, very powerful mindsets to go out and conquer the world. We're really taught to fit into society. Yeah. And this is the problem. So what you've got is, once someone gets their sense of self about what they believe or about what they do, and then suddenly they get some fame about that, then it's going to be very difficult for them to go against that if they find out it's wrong, because there's so much positive byproduct coming from that. And this was part of the reason for them, making all the medical people out to be heroes. Yeah, that wasn't an accident. Because suddenly they got their, let's look at it, the last 20 years, the NHS in the UK, the staff have been treated like crap, haven't they? They've been paid shitty money, terrible hours, all the private contracts have been stealing all the wealth. And all of a sudden, they're allowed to jump the queue. Everyone's saying, oh, thank you so much. They're suddenly got this 15 minutes of fame that humans crave. They want to feel special. Then are they going to turn around and say, actually, it's all bollocks? Even if they want it, it's so seductive, isn't it? Right. And a lot of people did stand up and say, no, this isn't true, because their sense of self, or whatever the combination of elements that resulted in that conclusion, they couldn't do it or whatever. But the unconscious mind wants you to survive. Okay. And it's going to be very hard to convince someone of something if that belief makes them redundant. And it's very, and is seductive. I've seen it in my own self where it's very easy to start to believe your own bullshit at times, or if people say very good things about you, and it's like, okay, well, fair enough, but if you can just focus on doing the right thing, yeah, it's a lot harder than it sounds.
But that's subjective, isn't it? What is the right thing?
Yeah, well, I think people know deep down, but yeah, it is a challenge that, but you can test it. That's the thing about being and it's not going to be easy to explain here. I'll just touch on it, but
Sure.
and it's what Richard Feynman was talking about, was not fooling yourself. Okay, so an alcoholic fools himself every day. So gets up, says, I'm not going to have a drink today, doesn't realize that his unconscious mind's going to crave one to fill whatever need it needs. The same with people with addictions to food or anything else. Addicts are very good at deceiving themselves. I've had addicts in my family, gambling addicts or whatever. They're not going to turn around and say, most addicts don't even admit they're addicts. Okay, because it's not good for the sense of self and the ego. That's of its extreme. But in the subtle ways, a lot of people in their roles are going to find a way to justify what they're doing. I mean, drug sales. Look at the people. Look, it's coming out now, isn't it? That pretty much most of the antidepressants are not what they were saying. Yeah, all the people selling those, they found a way to convince themselves they were doing right. Not many of them would. I would argue, how many of them would turn around and say, "Oh, I'm actually, I'm just like a crack dealer on the corner." It's very easy to rationalize whatever we're doing is, for the greater good or whatever it is.
I said to Lance recently, and I kind of remembered it the other day, about when I was going through my new thought processes a long time ago. I had to accept that I was easily fooled as a human being, and that I could in the future, if I was easily fooled with all this other stuff, I might be easily fooled with newer stuff.
Right. That's very wise.
Yeah.
That's a very wise.
And sorry, David, and the acceptance of that, I think was difficult to do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because see, this is the thing. If you can come to there's a certain amount of conclusions like that, similar to that, and ballpark of that are really important to come to, because you get a much more accurate understanding of how we function. So there's a couple of conclusions in behavioral science that, and I usually say don't tell people these because you have to show them, because a lot of the time people reject it. So one of the things is that we have an illusion about how much control we have over ourselves. Okay. And one of the main reasons is we want to believe in free will. Now, if you're honest about how much control you have over yourself, you actually get much more free will than the average person. Okay, because this is my belief, my opinion now, that our power lies in programming ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
To automatically respond a certain way. I can't control myself in the moment, okay? But I can go, oh, I did that, or I got angry at that. I wonder what caused that. Can I change my opinion on that, etc.? So when I said to you, like, do you decide to get angry? And the truth is, no, it's something that happens to you. You become conscious of it. And the question is, what caused me to get angry, whatever. You can manage your emotions. You can get a certain thing. And, and the situation dictates a lot of this output. And a lot of people learn to suppress their emotions because they're not, wise to show them in certain instances. But it doesn't stop them occurring. So really, we've got to be, and if we have a very good understanding of how we operate, that's when we get the power back. And there's a couple of other conclusions from behavioral science. So I pretty much tried to read every book on behavioral science the last 4 years, and it's blown my mind away. And I think what I've done is had a lot more accurate understanding of how my mind works, a mind. And it's allowed me to make significant changes in my environment and my life for it to work better. Okay. I've also noticed the amount of shit that's in my subconscious, and that's the part of the mind that you don't have direct access to, but you can infer what's in there. And once you can infer what's in there by various observations and tests, then you can do something about it. There's plenty of techniques out there. But here's the conclusion that I wanted to mention about what you just spoke about. And it's really, our conscious mind thinks it's the Oval Office, but it's more like the press office. So when we decide something, we think all of that happens consciously. Okay. But most of the processes are an unconscious process, aren't they? And you just come to the conclusion, oh, actually, I'm going to do that. There's so much that happens in the brain that's hidden from us because there's no need for us to see it. If you, when you were driving, if you did everything consciously,
never get anywhere.
You wouldn't do anything. You could, if you got out of bed consciously, and by that I mean if you had to measure the degree of your knee and then how much to the floor. So we have to realize that the unconscious mind is so powerful and it does so much for us. Okay. And the power is almost in training it or learning to communicate with it for it to do what we want to do. Okay. And because we're so, I mean, if we could really just show so many people in society what they're doing right now, if they could mirror to themselves and think, oh, that's just a complete waste of time. I mean, how many people are working in a job that they hate to buy stuff that they don't want to impress someone they don't even like? You know what I mean? It's just
90%.
like, yeah, people they don't even care about. People, I mean, people on the train in the underground in London worry about what everyone else is thinking. They're not even going to see them ever again. It's so fascinating. But this is where I think, and I'm referred to behavioral science, and I refer to it as a term that pretty much covers so much about behavior, psychology, communication. The discoveries are startling, okay, that they've made over the last few decades. And they're so startling because so many of them are stealth. And by stealth, we're not consciously aware of them. So advertising works, profoundly works, been proven to time and time again, yet everyone, almost everyone will say, I'm not affected by advertising. That is the power of it, that it usually they can release an advert, they can watch sales go up or positions, opinions change, and then the people that have been exposed to it won't know because, and this is one of the, if I could really manage to show people how this works, I think it would be so incredible that you've got this part of your mind and there's things in that part of your mind that influence your decisions and your behavior. That part of your mind can be influenced without your knowledge or consent when you're watching advertising. Okay. Now, the fact that you don't have access to it, okay, because it's automatic, because you don't consciously breathe, the fact that you don't have access to it, you often won't know when it's changed. Then if someone knows how to influence that part of your mind or that belief system, it will change without your awareness. And I'll give you an example. How many people, if you asked them 4 years ago or 5 years ago, said if you hold someone down and inject them with a substance that they don't want in their body, is that a fascist tendency?
Yes.
Okay, how many people would say yes? Probably most people, wouldn't they? All right. But yet most people a lot of people adopted that belief. But would they be conscious enough to say that they then believed that?
No.
You see how literally, because what happened was they had these things in their unconscious mind played about with, they then come to this conclusion that differed. And then, you know, and then if it came obvious to them, they would hit cognitive dissonance and try and deny it. But people had their dial moved. They did, I think it was December 19, they did a large scale study, a survey, and there was a large number of people that said they were not going to take a COVID vaccine if it came out. By April 21, in almost less than 18 months, they had flipped 86% of that survey. Okay, that is mind-boggling. Okay, and that was the repetitive propaganda in belief systems, stories. They do a single person, you know, did this and blah, blah, blah. What it's doing is it's slowly changing that unconscious process in the person's mind without their knowledge or consent, and therefore change their conclusion. They flipped 86% of people. in that survey. Okay, that is the power of propaganda. And one of the biggest powers of propaganda is our feeling that we can resist him. Okay, and obviously a lot of people become wise. One, don't watch TV, or definitely don't watch the news or whatever. But if you're repeatedly exposed to something, there is a good chance it may have an effect on you.
Wow.
Well, it's quite often you can obviously see it, the effect it does. Certainly, as an observer, you can see it in others, but obviously in yourself is a much more difficult thing because you've got to live in the moment.
Yeah. You can't access your own unconscious mind, but you can often see other people's change.
Yeah, it's easier to see others.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
I've got one last question. I'm
Sure.
trying to formulate it in my mind, so I'm just going to come out with it. How important is it to validate what someone's telling you?
Massively. It's also important to validate your own thoughts.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Now, this is both a blessing and a curse in the way that I was talking, I had a meeting with behavior scientists the other day, and we were talking about how their daughter thinks very well. And then she said to her, what process would you go through if someone told you this fact? And then she listed, right, well, I would do this, I would do that, I'd get a book, I would do this, all logical things. The challenge is now that that's anticipated. Okay, so and this was in Cheryl Atkinson's TED talk on AstroTurf. Now, she talks about AstroTurf as being this kind of fake reality that people think is real. So one of the big drug companies did, they gave some people some leaflets on one of their drugs, and then they monitored how they verified the information. And then what they did was they hijacked all the places that the person went to verify it. So then you couldn't verify it anymore. That's the challenge. But it still is that it must be verified. And of course, if you go beyond linear logic and look holistically, then you can start to tell whether it's AstroTurf or not. Okay. So when you looked at the narrative around a new pharmaceutical product that came out the last few years, they had managed, and it's a bit like Ocean's 11. Okay, so you've got this con artist, and he's going, how do I create this illusion that everything looks real? Okay, so you have all these different people involved, media, drug sale. You can see how it works, yeah? So all the con man is doing is he's working out all of the things that need to be present to make something look one way. Okay, when you know that, then you can start to see beyond the bonnet, and it doesn't take very long to realize this is absolute bollocks, and that's the thing. But that does take a little bit of skill, doesn't it? Because if you only look at first order logic, okay, the professor, when he's looking to verify the information, thinks, oh, I've ticked all the boxes, but he's not realizing the boxes have been gamed. Okay, there's one other thing. Humans will always game the system, because there's an inherent drive to succeed and to drive and whatever. So, and I think that's the point we've reached in history, that now people, once they're aware that they have to, yes, verify the information, but it also has to make sense, and it's got to be verified in a very clever way. You know what I mean? It's to blindly believe something is unfortunately the popcorn culture that we live in. Here's one other conclusion from behavioral science, which I think is probably one of the most important, and one that I can see that I fail at constantly. We don't make good decisions. We make decisions that make us feel good. We will always take the easiest route out, or we will always be tempted to take the easy route. Okay, so look how they got people to go to the self-service tills. All they've done is don't put many staff on, let the queues fall there, and people go, oh, I'm just going. Even the people like, I'll be in a complete rush, and I know I don't want to do that, you know, but I'm late for a meeting. I've got no choice, you know, and that's why I have to admit to myself, okay, I've made a decision that's the good rather than the good decision in that instance. You know, if I say, what do I want to eat right now? Am I going to make the decision that makes me feel good, i.e., you know, the tasty meal, or am I going to do a good decision? Obviously, good food does taste well if you can cook, but the problem is that it's much easier to blindly believe something. And if that information makes you feel good, so one of the things is, one of the traps of the mind, which we can all fall into, we want to feel superior. People want to feel good, okay? And one of the easiest ways to feel good is feel superior, whatever it is. If whatever club you're in is better than the other club, you know, you look in the unvaccinated dating, they're going to show off about being pure blood. So, you know, whatever it is, people want to feel good about whatever group they're in. And the problem is that a lot of the time, the edgy information allows people to, oh, I'm on the, oh, you don't know what I know. You know, I got one up on you. And this is the part of the problem, is that the culture that we live in is not rewarding clear, critical thought and doing the right thing. It's rewarding succeeding at any cost. Yeah. And the story of the bankers was a classic example, is that when they reminded the bankers in banking, it's literally dog eat dog, let's get to the top. I think so. Hopefully that does point out. But if you were to prompt someone beforehand and walk them through a series of questions about what's the sensible thing to do, okay, I think you might see different behaviors. If it become the norm, and see, what I think we're noticing is that more discernment is needed, because there's so many different things. And one of the boasts that I spoke about earlier is when I see people say, oh, I'm not going to wake anyone up, there's no point, they're all idiots, blah blah blah. Now, okay, it's a perfectly understandable conclusion to come to, because minds are so difficult to change that if you got the right conditions, a mind can change very well, but those conditions are not intuitive. Okay, so we, from our indoctrination at school, we think, I'm just going to throw a load of facts at someone, they're going to change their mind. Never worked, but it's never stopped us trying. So, but we keep thinking that because it's a habit. Okay, so then we form the conclusion, you can't change people, blah blah blah. Okay, let's test that. So if we can get people to test their own thinking and say, is that true? So, but I think people also vastly underestimate how much effect they're having, because it's analog. You can't measure it per se. They're just, you know, and this is the thing. It's like we've a lot of short-term thinking. It's very difficult to know when something succeeds, all of these things. But I think with understanding how the mind works, more discernment, clear thinking, because they haven't educated us to think well. On purpose. Tony Benn said the last thing a government wants is a free thinking public that's self-responsible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wouldn't be able to bilk us.
Yeah, exactly. Right. If you're selling burglar alarms, okay, what do you have to make the appearance to be?
That there's lots of burglaries.
Exactly. What's the government selling? Security. And like, it wants everyone popped onto that T.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the drives, the real drives. Okay. Let's understand this. So yeah, when you're, so really, I'd say some of the tips are really start to understand what's driving people, because it's not always what they say. And one of the other biggest things from behavioral science is the massive leap that they really took was they stopped listening to what people said and they started watching what they did. Okay, huge. But I started to do that to myself, because I really can bullshit myself very well. Okay, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to eat well tomorrow and go to the gym and all that stuff. And then, right, well, let's just measure it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, not the story in my mind, because that story in my mind is always going to sell me better and et cetera, et cetera. And because I know that, I just go to lengths to try and be more just as it is. Okay. But my mind's always going to want to try and paint me in the best possible light. Okay.
Brilliant.
It's just a drive that's there.
Yeah. Fantastic. You two got any questions for David?
Well, I mean, so much of this really is reminded me of basically Adam Smith's invisible hand.
Yes.
And fundamentally, the way that I see that, it's self-interest, and we don't know consciously what it is. But what I do find fascinating is that once you've subconsciously been programmed, you need to really look at the behaviors and then deprogram.
Yes.
So that you can catch yourself in the moment to reprogram a different way. So it takes a hell of a lot of time to learn to deprogram yourself.
Yeah.
And sort of getting in touch with these things, what you were saying there about, the intuitive and anger. I mean, what I did was for about 3 weeks, every evening, just sat down with what I called a feelings book.
Yeah.
And just try to go through the day and recollect, how did I react in situations?
Yeah, and bring awareness to it.
Yeah, and
that's really
that is
profound.
a tremendous way of
You said a couple of profound things there. The perspective is really, really key, because the perspective is coming from somewhere. Now, when you said, and it's true, because what we're conditioned creates the perspective, but we're conditioned survival of the fittest is a belief system that I'd argue that most people are educated at school. What if that wasn't true? What if it was survival of cooperation, which is what Bruce
well,
listed?
there's so much evidence, and if you look around in nature, that's actually the way that it works.
Yeah.
Survival of the fittest is Darwin himself said, I'll be amazed if this survives, before I die.
Yeah.
And it's still around.
Yeah, but that's the thing. If you're a lion, but you think you're a pussycat, how are you going to act?
Like a lion.
Yeah, but if you think you're a pussycat.
Oh, sorry, if you think you're a pussycat, like a pussycat.
Exactly. So this is the thing about the belief systems, and in fact,
it's incredible.
We're now starting to understand so much about it that I've been going through a reconditioning of myself the last couple of months. And it literally can take 30 minutes to rewrite a single belief that you've had for 30, 40 years. And I've noticed, there's a thing called the Lefko method. There's a Sedona method. So what happened was I literally consumed every behavior science book I could find. And then I came to these conclusions, and then I saw all these failings and faults in myself. And then I was like, okay, and I'm searching for the solutions to them. And I've already reconditioned so much, and it's been profound. And of course, what we're going to try and do then is to get more outwards, to simplify it, get it out there. But once we understand so much more about the brain, it's like anything, like look at the technology; it jumps in every field.
That's fascinating.
And the thing is, the sitting with the emotions is really key, and that's where the Sedona method is fantastic. So if someone gets cut up in the car and then they just get huge amounts of anger, right? Or if someone gets angry that the milk was left out, is that just a situation where they're able to vent their existing anger? Okay. And of course, if they then process that existing anger, then they're not going to experience so much more anger. So these are the things. It's not like we have buckets of emotion. And this is the thing about fear, because fear is the currency of control. And you get someone into so much fear, then whatever they do, they end up feeling fear all the time, don't they? So I think what you talked about there is really key. And I think I would say the elephant in the room are emotions.
Yeah.
In that, because it clouds judgment, and the people pushing these propaganda things, they're able to get so many people petrified. I mean, look, there was a meme the other day. 5 years ago, they had like the temperature and it was just all lovely day, and now it's just red, the world's burning and whatever.
Well, if you change what used to be blue into red, it's very easy to reprogram people.
Exactly. Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure, guys, and
that's been fantastic, David. Really, really interesting. Absolutely brilliant.
Yes, and what I'd say is for people to start thinking about creating a space to have a dialogue. Okay. And what needs to be in that dialogue? So the other person mustn't feel defensive. They must feel free to express themselves without being chastised or called names or any of these things. And then what you can see is people can actually start to separate from the ideas and then start to think better. But it's really about getting that dialogue. Debates are not it, because debates are, I've got to win this.
I've got an idea I'm going to throw at you. Maybe in the future, maybe we could think about doing a little bit of a role play.
Yeah, I think that's highly a very beneficial thing to do, because what you'll notice is that you'll need to do that a few times to adopt a new behavior.
Yeah.
Because our ingrained behaviors in trying to get an idea across to someone else often are not very effective. And it's not that, I mean, because they're too logical. Yeah. And the problem is that we're not logical. We have this illusion we can be. I mean, if you think that, you know, your spouse is logical, look in the fridge, look in the wardrobe, all these things, like they're going to have a lot more clothes than they need. They're going to have a lot, like, it's not about function and logic, is it? It's so much more than that. It's so much richer than that. And when we start to understand what really drives us, then start to adapt the way we talk to people to account for that, then you're going to see a very different conversation.
Brilliant.
Fantastic.
Right. Thanks very much, David.
Thanks, David.
Appreciate it as
Oh,
always.
welcome. Right, good to see you.
And you. Brilliant.